Good afternoon and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio's online lunchtime talk. These are live every Friday at 1 p.m, beaming out onto your smartphones, laptops, iPads and living room televisions. My name is Martin O'Leary and I'm the Pervasive Media Studio's creative technologist. These talks are our chance to throw open the digital doors of the Pervasive Media Studio and for you to hear more from the people who are part of our community or who are working on things that excite us. An especially big welcome to those of you who are new to the studio, for whom this may be the first time you're engaging with us. For all of you newcomers, here's a little bit about what we do. The Pervasive Media Studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding, and product development to performance art. We're a partnership between Watershed, the University of the West of England, and the University of Bristol. We're a home for early ideas, companies, and a meeting place of both the creative and commercial industries. We're a studio space, offering desk space, meeting rooms, events, and opportunities, all for free for our residents. And we're a safe space for artists to take risks in their practice and make time for collaboration. This week's talk is by Fozia Ismail, scholar, cook, and one of the members of Dhaqan Collective, a feminist art collective of Somali women based in Bristol. She'll be talking about her latest project exploring Somali audio tape culture and how it held families and Somali culture together across borders. There'll be a Q&A at the end with the talk running at roughly 30 minutes. If you want to ask any questions, just pop them into the chat window and I'll pick them out to ask Fozia. Or if you like, you can tweet your questions to @PMStudioUK. A captioned version of this talk will be available here after the talk is finished. Before we start, next week's talk is by Teresa Dillon, artist and professor of city futures at the University of the West of England. She'll be exploring the world of facial recognition, its intersectional histories, and the role of the artist in subverting it. You can get news on all of our future talks by following us on @PMStudioUK on Twitter or @Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or by subscribing to our newsletter on our website. Please don't forget to subscribe to this new YouTube channel, give the video a thumbs up. The more subscribers we get, the more likes we get, the more we can share stories like this. Please feel free to share the link now on any of your socials. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Fozia.
Thank you, Martin. Martin's been very patient with me with all my tech difficulties. Hi, I'm Fozia Ismail, and I did what you see on this image is a tape recorder and a cassette tape. I've always wondered about cassettes, having grown up with them as a child. So when we came to England, it was one of the main forms in which we communicated with family back home in Somalia. That was pre-Civil War, throughout the Civil War. And it's something that actually I realized lots of Somali families did. And, you know, it's kind of always stayed with me my whole life. This kind of thought that we, you know, as a child, it felt kind of an odd thing to get these cassettes, and then alongside them would always come camel meat, dried camel meat or mughal. And so in my head, these two things were intertwined. And if you don't know me from Arawelo Eats, I also run a Somali supper club. So I am obsessed about food and Somali food in particular. So this kind of relationship between the camel meat and the sound of relatives telling us about their everyday lives, what's going on in Hargeisa, updating us on you know, weddings, or kind of the everydayness of life that goes on even during a war, was to me entwined. So luckily, a few years in 2019, I kind of applied for a city fellowship for the Arnolfini. And I got the fellowship to explore this as looking at working with Bristol elders and women Somali women in Bristol to kind of think about, you know, did they have this experience of dealing with these tapes? And it was a really fun, I absolutely loved the city fellowship for a lot of reasons. This is some Somali fabric print, and it's a very close up of a dirat, which is a Somali dress that's worn in the home. It's kind of a casual, a very comfortable dress that's worn. And we worked with a range of Somali elders in Bristol, 6 to 7 women, at Primeway Care Home, and it was wonderful. We interviewed them around their use of cassettes. The youngest was probably about 65. The eldest were in their 80s, and so the stories that they told about the medium and the kind of the use, from people using it to divorce their wives or husbands, to lots of wonderful love stories, across borders, people keeping in contact, like tape letters, and, having arguments, long-term arguments through audio. This kind of slowness was so sort of really interesting to us. So we explored this in a series of workshops, which resulted in a soundscape, which you'll listen to in a bit. Here we've got the Somali, this is a more distant image of the Somali dresses. And here what I wanted to create really was this kind of intimate feeling and the group communal listening of the cassette tapes that I remember from childhood. You can just see Ayan there. So one of the best aspects of doing this project has been working with younger Somali female artists, Ayan Cilmi and Asmaa Jama. Asmaa Jama is also a Pervasive Media Studio resident. It was so wonderful to do this project with them. And we all got so much from the process of working alongside each other, but also working alongside the elders. It was over a course of a series of 7 workshops, where we recorded all the workshops on cassette tape, as well as a digital version, just in case it went wrong. And then we digitized all the recordings to turn them into a soundscape. I think the process of working with tape and the material of tape was really interesting, because when you would go back to listen, sometimes, you'd think you would press record, but you might have not recorded, or there's a lot of technical issues about the slowness of tape and also the unpredictability of it, that I think speaks really interesting to this time of all of us using Zoom and these digital technologies, and the kind of also the privacy that happens when those stories, or when you've recorded on tape, because it's not something that's easily shared. It's not a material, it's kind of it's in this physical format, and you need the cassette recorder to listen to. And so we kind of explored this with the elders about this kind of slowness of the medium and the privacy actually of the medium, of what would be shared, and how sometimes some of the tapes would be communal, and other times, like my mum would kick me out or kick the kids out. It wasn't for children to listen to. And so you kind of have this really strange, I just have really a lot of interesting memories about the medium itself. But one of the things that was really powerful to me was how it allowed a kind of democratic sharing of stories, because for a lot of the Somali elders that we worked with, like my mum and her sister, are illiterate. They were never taught to read and write. So a really important aspect of that was the fact that you could communicate to loved ones all over the world without it having to be written down. And so it kind of really broke down that barrier, and allowed people to share, without having to need to write a letter. And so I think that was a really big part of it. But another side is that actually Somali culture is such an oral, it's kind of it has such a rich oral culture. It's full of poetry. It's working with the elders, you really felt, I am not very fluent in it, and you really felt tongue-tied in the use of the language, because a lot of Somali is about not just what you're talking about, the practical things of what you're talking about, but actually how you say it. People expect you to be able to be kind of have flair with your language, you know. So that's just in everyday conversation, you know. Can you talk well? Can you tell a story well? Can you keep interest? And so that's such an important part of I feel why audio tapes were shared in this way. And it wasn't just personal reflections on family life. Sometimes people would go and record cultural events like theatre that was happening in Hargeisa. You know, so you'd have a tape recording of poetry, live poetry or live theatre. And that given the fact that cultural institutions right now are, you know, it's a really difficult time to access culture and theatre and poetry and that communal way of being together. I thought that was such a lovely way in which Somali people maintained not just their family connections, but actually maintained Somali culture as a whole when living abroad in the diaspora. So this was a really important way of, I guess, almost resisting integration in a simple way, you know, because I think, you know, a big part of the culture is, which I'll go on to later, talk about what Dhaqan means and what it means for Somali people, but it's that kind of how do you maintain your roots to Somaliness when you're scattered all over the world, but also that we're nomadic people, so we're scattered across land anyway. This scattering or this unrootedness, I think you know, nomadic culture, you're moving around always. So how do you maintain elements of your culture when you're moving? Here is an image of Fatima, who's she's wonderful, and with something she crafted for us, actually. So she made this beautiful weaving. A lot of the soundscape, which you can listen to on our website, but you'll get a clip later, the weaving is such an important part of nomadic culture, and there's so much knowledge contained, not just in the weaving. Those patterns will have a particular song. There are folks, you know, so you sing while you weave. So you're making this communal stuff with your hands. And part of the reason I really wanted to explore this really was almost this kind of, I love the Professor Joan Annam Addo, she's a professor at Goldsmiths, concept of counter-writing the academia through Black feminist work. So I feel, you know, there's a quote here, intervention is based on, can't see it because of where the screen is, sorry. Intervention is premised upon a politics of care, the urgency of Black absence from institutions, how Black British history and thought as fundamentally anti-racist and anti-colonial can generate a reinvention much needed in the present of a shared British history. And I find this concept really interesting because one of the sessions we did with the Somali elders was to take them to the Commonwealth archive, which is based in Bristol. And this experience was really interesting because we had lots of objects from this archive, and the women had a chance to comment on these objects. And, you know, what's interesting about knowledge production, particularly within academic or within, actually, I would say, a Western framing of what knowledge is and how it's transferred, is there's such a focus on objects or things being written down, and this idea that somehow all of this research tells the truth. You know, this kind of need to, oh, sorry, I don't know what happened there. Oops, apologies. Nothing's changed for you guys. Okay, good. So basically, I'm really interested in how, you know, how the knowledge that's contained within these Somali women elders who live in Bristol and who are for most part ignored by most of society, who are mostly who people don't think have skills or knowledge or amazing philosophical concepts that they can share. You know, there's a real ignorance about a lot of Somali culture, but on top of that, these are the kind of women you might pass in the East and make assumptions about. And I think it was really important to see them in a space of an institution like the Commonwealth Archive, and actually, you know, one of the outcomes was they spontaneously sang a resistance song, like a song that was sung to celebrate the independence from Britain when Somaliland when Somalia Somaliland became independent of British rule. And that was their reaction to the Commonwealth Archive, which I find really interesting. The idea that the expertise wasn't there on Somali culture, and that there was an issue around a drum, and you know, that was a drum, but it had been written down inaccurately to say it was a food vessel. You know, so it was all of these things about the way in which even our own cultural objects in these kind of museums and spaces haven't been engaged with those communities that those objects come from. And so we use the kind of the workshops as a way of really interrogating this idea of what's told about Somali women within institutions, and what's you know, really to try and frame things and recenter Somali women voices, but really with a duty and a politics of care attached to that. And what I mean by that is, when I talk about politics of care, I mean a politics that speaks to, if we're going to research or do work, community engagement work, if we're going to do this work with marginalized communities, it's really important to do it in a way which is non-exploitative. And part of the way we did that was women were paid for their time for attending workshops and sharing their knowledge with us. This is a bit of a segue in some ways. I hope it's not too much of a segue. At the minute, we're all stuck in our homes, and I really wanted to talk about the way in which sound travel, you know, the way in which Somali people kind of maintain their culture across these borders through sound and food. But something that's really interesting to me recently has been this kind of obsession with where British holiday makers will go, you know, the lack of being able to go abroad or whatever. And I think this issue around, you know, this is a wonderful quote by Jamaica Kincaid from A Small Place. She's a wonderful writer. Every native is a potential tourist, and every tourist is a native of somewhere. Every native would like a tour, but most natives in the world cannot go anywhere. And I think this is really interesting about the movement of people and migration, around who gets to tour, who gets to be a tourist, or who gets to be a refugee, you know, and this kind of idea that there's choice attached to where we travel and how we travel. And I think a big part of my wanting to do this project and wanting to work in this way with cassettes, and was me kind of searching almost for those stories that haven't, you know, those stories that haven't been shared around Somali culture, which is kind of joyful and exuberant and fun, and rather than the narratives that you get in the everyday, which, you know, media images, which is kind of obsessed with our pain, or the way in which we are just terrorists, or in general don't fit, you know. So there's a lot of Somali phobia out there, you know. We don't fit, we're not quite, you know, we're not quite integrated enough as a community, where, you know, we have loads of children. There's this kind of real, I think, negative perception, which makes it very hard for, I think, for us to move and on, you know, to feel, okay, how do we've moved to this place, not because we're tourists, but out of circumstances that were beyond our control. And how do you maintain that culture while while navigating issues of not feeling welcomed, basically. And I feel like this project has been a really lovely way to connect the Somali diaspora across and route it back to original journeys, not just to here, to this country, but actually that this was a part of Somali culture. These sharing of cassette tapes were a really vital part of maintaining Somali culture across the diaspora. I'm going to play you a little bit of a soundscape, or Martin is. So Martin, if you want to play the soundscape.
Geela markuu daraaran yahay laba nin dugtaaye laba nin dugtaaye laba nin dugtaa.
Okay. Here you have just a snippet of the soundscape. It was one of the songs. It's actually one of my favorite bits of the 10-minute soundscape we did. And it's a song that Saad is singing about it's a song about camels, basically. It's a song about the camel has 4 udders, or it's something about the udders of the milk of the camel, I think, rough translation. So this camel the camel is such an important part of Somali culture. So I know when people see camel meat and cassette tapes, I think everyone's sort of kind of like, this is a little bit odd, but the camel is such a fundamental part of Somali culture. I mean, there are so many songs and folk tales about the camel, because it is the way that Somali people have been sustained in what are quite hard landscapes to survive in. If you think of a Western, that's what I think of with Somaliland. Somaliland, like, it reminds me of there's that Tom Hanks film recently on Netflix, and I was looking at it and where he travels and all these rocks. I was thinking, oh, that really reminds me of bits of the Somaliland landscape. And so there's a real, I think, the fact that we've maintained that love of camels through this oral history, that oral tradition, is something that's really important to share with younger Somali people, because I know that I grew up eating mughal, which is this dried camel meat, but I know that lots of younger Somali people think it's disgusting, and I always find it really interesting, this kind of thing, which I think you get less access to than you did when I was growing up. But I think it's really interesting how foods come and go out of fashion, but actually, regardless of that, the camel is a fundamental part of our culture and our survival as a people. This is a lovely image that Stacey Oliker did, a graphic image of the women, and I love it because a lot of them didn't want their photos shared. And so it was a really interesting way of getting their image and centering them in the Arnolfini space. So when we shared the soundscape, the image was projected and they were centered, and the chairs were lined around it. And so it was like you felt that they were in the room. Right. So a lot of the work that we did with Asmaa and Ayan, and the work that we kind of did through the process of working with sound and working with the elders and working with this medium of tape resulted in us setting up the Dhaqan Collective. And so Dhaqan are kind of the philosophies that are common between Somali people wherever they are. And it kind of helps to root, it's almost like an ancestral wisdom that helps root you in a home, wherever you happen to live in the world. And I love that way. Dr. Ahmed Ilmi, Ali Ilmi, who's based in Canada, talks about it being actually quite an important form of resistance for Somali people across the diaspora, who are marginalized in so many areas of the world. These kind of threads, these connections, the way in which we would exchange tapes and culture and maintain that oral history, as well as the food history, I feel really speaks a lot to our resilience as a people, and also our joy. You know, the working with the elder, I mean, Asma and Ayan and I, like, we just, honestly, it was so much fun. We laughed a lot. You know, so this kind of image of marginalized communities that people have, I always think it's really interesting when the reality is people are trying to live their best lives despite what the world throws at them, and you know, continuing from a place of love and joy. And you know, I really hope that we can build on that work. We've been funded by the Arts Council for Camel Meat and Tapes Part 2, which we're really, really excited about. So we will be continuing that work this year, with this time focusing on young Somali people in Bristol. So I'm really excited about doing some interesting work using that same material of cassette to kind of connect and get us thinking about how we share audio and sound and stories. I think I have talked enough. Thank you so much for listening. Any questions, just pop them in.
Right, thanks so much, Foz. That was fantastic. We have already got our first question from Joe Lansdowne. Can you tell us anything more about the relationship between Somali culture being nomadic and the movement of the tapes?
Yeah, I think so. With Somali culture being nomadic, you have these scribes. So pre-tape culture, you would have, my dad was one actually, you have poets and they travel around the country telling all the news of the day. And similar to that, again, I'm going to reference that Tom Hanks movie. I actually quite enjoyed it. He's a scribe. He's telling, you know, he reads the newspapers for all these people who don't have access to that information. And so you would have a similar thing happening, you know, in Somaliland, in Somalia, you would have the poet, the scribe, and they would travel around and they would pick up what's going on, and they would pass different villages and share the news. So that oral history and that that sharing through sound has always been we've never really when was the first Somali language written? I think it was a text was made up for Somali in 1967 or something. It's very, like, we did not have something that was written down really to share. So everything was shared through the language, through storytelling, or through the voice. So I think that's part of the reason cassette tapes were such a big attraction. Also, they're light, it's portable, it's fairly cheap. You know, so if you compare it to vinyl, you know, as a technology, it just makes sense to be able to share using that medium. So I think there is a connection between why Somali people use this medium when they were used to kind of using, I guess it took over the role of the one person going around different villages, maybe telling the latest poetry or culture or news of the day.
Right. And Sarah Madden asks if you could tell us a bit more about the next phase of the project with younger people.
Yes. So the next phase of the project with younger people will be happening in Bristol. We're going to be doing 4 workshops. One, so the workshops this time, we're experimenting with cassette, the material itself, which is really exciting. So I did a podcast with Caribou Project where we interviewed, God, my brain's not working. We interviewed a cassette artist in Berlin who's quite a big electronic artist, but he uses cassette loops and uses the cassette tape in a really interesting way. So he records, sort of nasty or racist narratives because they've got a huge issue with the far right in Germany. And then he kind of destroys the tape and then turns turns that tape destruction into a sound that he uses for his electronic music. And so it's this kind of drowning out of the hate using the cassette tape, which I really love the idea of. So we're going to do some experimentations where we're working with an artist called Rowan Bishop, who you can follow him on Instagram. He's great. He does all these funny things on tape loops and using a technology, and he has designed a workshop that we hope will work on Zoom. So that they should be starting at the end of March. They were meant to happen earlier, but obviously with COVID restrictions, it's becoming difficult. And so hopefully we'll see what will happen with that. And then at the end of that, what we hope is that there will be another soundscape that's created, but this time by Somali young people. And then we'll share those soundscapes. We would love to do a cassette tape release, actually. And that's the aim. And we would do that with Weberi Records, which is a Somali record company based in London, not in London, based in the UK. And they're great.
Great. Rowan is actually in the chat right now, and he's saying
Rowan.
Heinbach, which I think might be the name of the...
Heinbach, that's it. Oh my God, Rowan, I can't believe I forgot. I was like, he's so amazing. I forgot his name. Yeah, Heinbach, really interesting guy, really, really great.
Great. So Grace Quantock in the chat is saying she hopes the elders that you interviewed are doing as well as possible during lockdown. And are the tapes playing any part in connectivity during COVID, or is it more about connection over distance?
I think actually, in terms of the cassette tapes, I don't think people use cassette tapes in the same way that they did. Now it's all via WhatsApp technology. So a lot of people are keeping in touch via WhatsApp. My mum's constantly on that, but to people all over the world. But what's really interesting is you have a lot of people will have a stash of cassette tapes that they haven't done anything to, and that's another stage I'd like to do. I mean, I know that back in Hargeisa, my family have a huge collection of tapes that I would love to get access to. There's a huge issue around, it's quite a complicated issue with old tapes. You have voices of dead relatives, you have voices of they kind of live on in a sonic form, this kind of, but there's a issue around the sharing as well of tapes that weren't meant to be shared. But in terms of connectivity, I think the digital world is amazing for all of these ways in which you can connect up much more easily with relatives back home. I don't know if that answers your question, Grace. The soundscape, to be honest, the sounds in terms of the singing and the folk songs and all of the stuff we recorded in the soundscape, those things people will do at home. Like they will be doing it together, or they'll be there are songs. I can't tell you the amount of times that the elders broke out in spontaneous song. Like I think it's just such a fundamental part of our culture. I'm more distant from it, and so we were talking about how we've lost that ability for communal singing. I can't just break out into a communal song, but it's similar to, I guess, English folk songs. You would have had English workers who would have known folk songs. Maybe they would have worked crafting, and I think with most craft activities, you will have a song that will go with that activity for remembering the patterns or remembering how, so I think it's really interesting how memory, just really fascinating, that role of song. Sorry, I went and rambled.
No, that was great. I wanted to ask actually, and you touched on it a bit. Are there any efforts to like conserve these tapes as a sort of historical objects now that they're starting to recede into history as a practice?
Yeah, absolutely. There are big efforts to conserve the tape. So there's Weberi Phone or Weberi Records. Ibrahim is one of the artists we're also working with in part 2. Him and Idil are amazing. So they have set up almost a Somali archive for these tapes. He's digitized 4,000 tapes in the UK alone. This is just like a young man on his own, he's not even funded yet by he should be being funded by Heritage Lottery, or someone needs to fund the project. I'm happy to support him on a funding bid. I just feel like what him and Idil have done in terms of really going out of their way to help preserve some of these tapes is amazing. So there is that work happening. In Hargeisa, it is happening a little bit, but not as much. Maybe it is happening, but the issue we've got, and it's something that Ibrahim and Idil both work on, is this part of the reason they started doing this archiving is have you heard of Awesome Tapes for Africa and all these kind of white hipsters who go around Africa and then they collect these cassette tapes that they find, and then they end up, winning, there's Austin Tento Records who did Somali, they won a Grammy for these songs, Somali songs that they found. And a lot of, so it's a kind of tape crate digging that goes on by a lot of people that are interested in music. But it's been happening for years. We're currently working with the British Library, actually, on a separate project. Dhaqan Collective being commissioned to work with them on their world music archives. So we're going through, Asmaa and Ayan have been doing a lot of work on that. And so we're going to be interviewing elders on the British Library sound archives as well. Was that your question, Martin? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was good.
Did that answer? Sorry, I always start going on a ramble.
Yeah, it was good. It's good. And yeah, if anyone else wants to get in any questions, please do. I wanted to ask though. Like, you talk a lot about the digitizing the recordings and taking the sound, but is there anything about the physicality of the tape as an object which you think is important, or are they just vessels for that sound?
No, I think there's something about that, the texture of the sound of cassette that is really comforting. There's a quality to cassette loops that just, I don't think you get it through the digital. It's that work, that kind of crackly sound in the background. It's sort of like, I don't know, for me, but maybe it's because I grew up listening to cassette tapes that I find it, maybe I'm nostalgic about it, but I think there is a different quality to it. And I think the physicality is important, actually, in terms of that's something that's very precious. So that someone's voice is contained on it. So I've got a tape here somewhere in one of these boxes with my from Hubadol, one of my aunts, and I haven't listened to it. I need to digitize it, but I'm fearful also the process of digitizing it, because that tape would have been 25 years old or something, 20 years old, I don't know. It's quite an old, and the material itself is can degrade, and if not stored properly, and so there are that's another element of the project that I'd love to explore further down the line, is how do we digitize tapes that you might destroy in the process of digitizing. So I think the physicality does matter, but also maybe there's a different way of thinking about it, which is the sound, rather than is it important to digitize? Maybe the memory of the sound is as important as itself, so that's a what would be the role, what's the purpose of digitizing, and for who, you know, because some of these tapes wouldn't have been intended for public consumption, and so that's always something that we're interested in, that kind of in terms of our politics of care that runs through the way the Dhaqan Collective work. Asmaa and Ayan and I are really, really aware of that privileged position that we're lucky and fortunate enough to work with Somali elders who have taken the time to share with us. And so how do you do that work in a way that's non-exploitative, but also allows for those stories to be captured, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Still time for more questions if anyone wants to get one in. But you mentioned that people could listen to the soundscape. Do you want to give some more details on that?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, maybe I can play it. People want a 10-minute, I mean, it's 8 minutes. I know we've got till 2. Let's have a look. Oh my God. I think it's on the website actually. So this is me being incredibly slow. If you bear with me, I'll get the soundscape up.
I might be able to get it up at my end.
God. Right, sorry guys. This is terrible. I feel very disorganized. I wasn't expecting to. Oh, do you know what? It's gone on to. Okay, let's have a look. It is here somewhere. Wave. Let me just go on the website. Okay, so here is past projects. Here it is. Can you hear it?
Yeah, a little bit. Maybe.
I'll share it on the chat. And oh no, I can't. It's not on Zoom.
I'll share it in the chat. I think I can. Let me share the link.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to come through on.
Okay. I'll share the link with you, Martin, now.
Oh, there we go. We have a few more questions coming through. So.
They're talking about food. I can stop it. Sorry. Do you want me to stop?
It's up to you. I think we do have a few more questions. If you want to take a few more questions.
Okay. Right. I've kind of my computer. Sorry, I do want to take some questions. I'm just
okay.
Like, where? It's gone. Here it is.
Great,
okay.
Thanks.
Sorry about that.
Melissa Blackburn asks whether it's important to keep these stories for the future or whether they are in memory.
Yeah, I think you can do both. I think for younger Somali people who were born here, for example, who didn't have that movement, you know. So I remember coming here. I remember the importance of these tapes to my family. I think it's really important for future generation of Somali people to link into that part of our culture, because it's part of British history as well. You know, that's another important element. It's not just part of Somali history. I'm a British Somali person, and so it's kind of, yeah, it's important to maintain that. I think if you spoke to the elders, they would have a different. I mean, I think they would just think, what are we doing? You know, in a way, preserve, you know, learn the language. That's what they'd say. They would take the piss out of me and Ayan quite a lot around our Somali language skills. So they would firstly say the most important thing for anyone to do is learn the language. I feel, but yeah. I hope that answers the question, Melissa, and hi.
Joe Lansdowne asks as well, something I'm very interested in, which is, has your mum let you listen to all of the tapes now, or are there still ones that she won't let you hear?
No, I'm sure I could. I'd have to find them, you know. Yeah, I think they're all in Hargeisa, you know, back home. A lot of the tapes are back home for some reason, and it will be an interesting process listening to the tapes. Yeah, I think a lot's changed, but also they're getting that generation, like my mum's generation, you know, she's 75. So I feel it's quite I don't know if they want to leave that behind. You know, that's what it felt like. It was a bit like we did that then, and now there's WhatsApp, so why are you interested? Like when I talk to my mum about the project, she's just like, why there's WhatsApp, you could talk to people. Why would so for I think for that generation, it was just a means to an end. Like, I need to communicate this to someone. And then for me, it's something that I remember in childhood, and that I remember being very, you know, it was special. And you'd have your camel meat, and then, you know, you'd listen, and then you'd be chucked out of a room, and then, you know, so I just remember this blurred like thing of listening to this sound coming out, and me having to record back and feeling really nervous about what I would record back on these tapes that are going to travel, you know, back to Somalia. You know, the idea that that's what, you know, you would record your voice and it would be somewhere else, used to really yeah, just used to give me kind of real, like, what is happening? How is my voice going to be there? Like, it made no sense to me as a child. But that's a good question, Joe. I will ask my mum. It would be, yeah, I think for them it's a different, I think it's kind of a bittersweet story, isn't it? I feel like when me and Ayan and Asma talk about it, and you talk to your parents, we talk to our parents, I feel that they went through so much that they probably don't share, you know. And I can't imagine, you know, what it would be like to move your family and to not feel secure in your status, in your immigration status, and to feel, you know, you have to keep your children safe, but you don't know if they will be safe. So I feel that it becomes it becomes a different conversation. So yeah, I think it's an interesting one in the context of what we're doing now to refugees. I think the cruelty of our immigration system is appalling, you know. So I you know, maybe, you know, it'd be wonderful if we can view people as people and humans as people, you know, and get rid of all borders. Really, that would be a wonderful thing. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. That's
okay.
So Joe Kimber asks, when you were younger, did you use cassette tapes in a different way, like making mixtapes for your friends or recording off the radio? Because
Yeah.
we're the same age, myself as well, cassette tapes were a massive part of our childhood.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely did. Definitely. I think my first cassette tape might have been Blue by Madonna. Has she got an album called Blue? Anyway, yeah, definitely. I would have recorded mixtapes. I would have done different things with it. It's really fun. And that's another element that we could explore as well, which would be really fascinating. Mixtapes are really great, aren't they? It was such a special thing to get a mixtape and to make it.
Do you still have any?
I don't. I can't believe this is the. Where are my mixtapes? I think I would have got rid of lots of things. Like, you know, just if it's not functional for my life right now, it's out.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the same attitude your mum has to the tapes.
Yeah, it is. I wonder if it's the nomad in me. Someone was saying, you know, it's a very nomadic way. We don't, you know, there's an archaeologist, a Somali archaeologist, that talks about this, Somali people and their relationship to objects being very, very functional, and but their relationship to stories and culture being very, you know, intense, but not it's not about the object. The story is maybe the things that you tell about that object, and I find that really interesting.
Great. I think we'll probably wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Fozia. That was phenomenal. And yeah, best of luck with part 2.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I'm sorry if I was a rambly, like this is all very rambly stuff sometimes. But listen to the soundscape on the website. You'll see under past projects, and yeah, it's really lovely.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
So before you go, next week's talk is by Teresa Dillon, artist and professor of city futures at the University of the West of England. She'll be exploring the world of facial recognition, its intersectional histories, and the role of the artist in subverting it. You can get news on all of our future talks by following us on @PMStudioUK on Twitter, or @Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or by subscribing to the newsletter on the website. Please don't forget, subscribe to the YouTube channel, give the video the thumbs up. The more subscribers we get, the more likes we get, the more we can share stories like this. Please feel free to share this link. Captioned version of this video will be available to watch again shortly after we finish up. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you here again next week.